Just to say hello to everyone. So my name is Sam Dancy, and I lead our digital accessibility practice at TTC Global. Do you mind if we go to the next slide, please, Charlie?
Absolutely not.
Thank you. So firstly, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, and I'd like to pay my respect to elders past and present. Some of you have already started, but if you'd like to share which land you're joining us from today, please do add that into the chat. I'm joining us from Gadigal land of the Eora Nation, but please do feel free to add that into the chat as well. So as I mentioned, we are the testing consultancy, so TTC Global. For those of you who don't know who we are, who aren't familiar with us, may not have spoken to us before, we are an IT consulting firm. We do specialize in quality assurance, so testing in the software lifecycle. My wonderful team, we are our digital accessibility practice. So team of fabulous experts who support organizations on their digital accessibility journeys. So just to let you know, we are a team within TTC Global. And if you don't mind going to the next slide, thanks, Charlie. So in relation to our digital accessibility practice, if you're not familiar with us, we tend to have sort of two main ways of working. So, we can manage accessibility on your behalf. So, and things like undertaking audits or monitoring or working on accessibility for teams who may not yet have the skills or the capacity or the capability to do so themselves. But we also support teams to embed better ways of working, to think more strategically about accessibility, to better understand the user experience, and sort of maybe provide training, coaching, tooling. So sort of kind of an end-to-end way of supporting teams to think about accessibility and meet you where you're at. And we are very proud to say that we are also part of the Valuable 500. So we are one of the consulting organizations that can support teams around the world to think about digital accessibility. Do you mind if we go to the next slide, please, Charlie? Thank you. I just wanted to raise a little bit of awareness around our public training before we get into our webinar today. So we do, throughout the year, we do run public training. We do this because we understand it's not always that easy for teams to get their whole team to come along to some internal training, but an individual may be interested in a topic and it may be a more cost-effective way for you to do some learning. So just to flag, there is a QR code there if you'd like to learn some more, or you can just go to our webpage. But in June, we have another document accessibility workshop coming up. In July, we have our WCAG 2.2 deep dive, which is very popular. And then in August, we have some creating accessible documents fundamentals. So that's just the next few months. But if you want to have a look at other months later on in the year, please feel free to use the QR code. And hopefully we see some of you online. Do you mind if we go to the next slide, please, Charlie? Thank you. And in sort of the theme today, so I will introduce Charlie shortly, but she is building and growing our accessibility research community. So just wanted to raise awareness about that today. So our usability practice does seek feedback and user research from the community. So we do speak to people with lived experience of disability, people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds and other backgrounds. So if you are someone that would like to be part of our community and provide feedback to organizations, we do have a QR code on the screen. You can join through our website as well, but just wanted to raise awareness that we are building a community and we would love to chat to you if you have some feedback to give. So I will move on to the next slide, please, Charlie. Thank you. Okay, so Global Accessibility Awareness Day. As Charlie said earlier on, it's GAAD Eve, which I thought was a great way of, of talking about it. So tomorrow is Global Accessibility Awareness Day. We tend to try and run these prior to the day so that people can take information, what they've learned, key takeaways back to their teams. So what is it that you're doing to celebrate this year with your team? If you do have a team meeting tomorrow or any meeting that you're part of, can you raise awareness? Can you start to think about accessibility with the people that you're talking to tomorrow? So your call to action today is to think about what you've learned or maybe a key takeaway and to take that back to your organization to celebrate GAAD tomorrow. I think it's, yeah, and it's still, yeah, tomorrow. I know we've got someone from Atlanta, so I'm thinking of dates, but tomorrow, the 21st of May. The purpose of GAAD, if you're not aware, is to start conversations, to raise awareness, and to get people thinking. So yes, so we hope that that's what this webinar does today, and that tomorrow you can generate some conversation within your own teams and organizations. Okay, we can move to the next slide, please, Charlie. Thank you. So just by way of mini agenda, Charlie will talk for about 35 minutes today. So we will have a presentation from Charlie. We will be saving the questions for Charlie to the end. So I will be looking at those and compiling those and maybe answering some as we go in the chat. So just to let you know that we do have time at the end for questions. And so, yeah, so that will take us up to the hour with the presentation and the questions. Thank you, Charlie. And importantly, I would like to introduce Charlie Parker. Some of you already know Charlie. She is our senior usability and accessibility consultant here at TTC. Charlie leads our usability practice, and as I mentioned, is growing our accessibility research community at present. So Charlie has over 17 years experience working in digital accessibility across public and private sector digital services. She has more than 15 years experience designing and leading inclusive research with people with disability and people from marginalised communities. And she has deep expertise in applying WCAG, inclusive design principles, and usability best practice from across complex, content-heavy and transactional digital services. So we're very lucky to have Charlie talking today. And without further ado, Charlie, I will hand to you.
Thank you very much, Sam, for your lovely introduction. I sound really good on paper. And thank you to everybody watching, listening, and joining us today for this GAD Eve. I wanted to start today's talk with a poll because the heart of today's talk is looking at a question that I want you to sit with that really sits at the heart of GAD and one that maybe isn't asked enough when it comes to accessibility. And that is, what does accessibility actually feel like? So what does a product feel like to use that's been built? So what does digital accessibility mean to you? Um, and we've got a few options.
Yep, and people are starting to answer, Charlie. So, meets WCAG standards, passes an accessibility audit, usable for everyone, inclusive experience across all users, or not sure, varies by content. So we're still getting some answers through. So that poll should have popped up on people's screens. Feel free to add your answer into the chat as well, if that's easier as well. So thank you. I can see ability to participate for all has popped up in the chat. Thank you. That's a great response. Okay, I'm going to end the poll there because I think we've got everyone's answers now, and I will share the results. And hopefully that's showing the results now to you, Charlie, as well.
So we've got passes and accessibility. So meets WCAG standards didn't get a vote, which I'm kind of pleased with. Passes and accessibility audit, usable for everyone. That got 34% of the vote. Inclusive experience across all users got 62% of the vote. And not sure got 2% of the vote, which is absolutely fine. And it doesn't matter where you sit with that poll. For yourselves, hopefully by the end of it, I'll have you thinking about that and looking at accessibility and standards and compliance in a little bit of a different way. Now, I know from a general usability perspective, there's a desire for things to be engaging. When things are built, they want people to engage, they want people to enjoy their experience, they want people to go and tell others about it. But when it comes to accessibility, we spend an enormous amount of energy testing whether a product can be used. So if we can work out some sort of workaround to get from point A to point B, that's often good enough. We spend far less time asking whether they should have to be used that way. And that gap between technical access and genuine human experience is what this session is about. So take a moment to think about the last accessibility audit you were involved with if you work in that area, and that's whether you were having somebody do an audit for you, if you're an auditor, where you fit in that process. Did it tell you whether the experience was good for a user, or did it just tell you that the product passed? So I'm semi-famous for saying that I don't care about WCAG. And to be fair, that's a bit of a clickbait statement. Standards exist for a reason. They give us a shared language, a defensible baseline, and a way to measure progress. Well, CAG has done extraordinary work in defining what technical accessibility looks like. But standards were never designed to be the finish line. They were designed to be the starting gate. The problem is that somewhere along the way, does it pass? Is it compliant? My favourite, can I get a certificate? Became the question, and we forgot to go further than that. And when that happens, we stop asking the more important question, is this actually good for people? So let's explore how that shift happens and what it costs. So this is the hidden assumption at the centre of most digital accessibility programs. If it passes, it's accessible. If we do an audit, we fix all of the things that come out in the audit, it's accessible. And it sounds reasonable. Standards exist for a reason. Audits are rigorous. But this assumption contains a critical flaw. Passing a technical audit tells you that something is possible to use. It doesn't tell you whether it's reasonable to use, whether the experience is equitable, or whether it causes harm. A screen reader user can technically navigate a form that takes them 40 steps to complete, but that's not an accessible experience by any meaningful human measure. We need to separate these two things, technical conformance and lived experience. They overlap, but they're not the same. WCAG and similar standards are designed as a minimum baseline, not as a quality benchmark or equity framework. They answer questions like, can this image be perceived by someone who can't see it? Can this control be operated without a mouse? Can the page be understood without a visual context? And these are essential questions, but they're flaw questions, not ceiling questions. Standards tell us whether a door exists and whether it can technically be opened. They don't tell you whether anyone can comfortably move through it. So, and we see it all the time. I'm sure we've all been to webinars and talks and conferences where people have shown ramps and, something is accessible because there's a ramp, but the ramp is on a massive angle and goes straight out onto the middle of the road, but it's accessible because it has a ramp. Digital accessibility, when we only focus on compliance, when we only focus on audits, is very similar. It can be used. It doesn't mean that it should be used. And even within standards, interpretation matters enormously. Two organisations can audit the same product against the same criteria and reach very different conclusions. And anyone who works in the auditing space, I'm sure we've all been there, where we've picked up a client who's worked with someone else who has brought up something in an audit that we disagree with or missed something in an audit that we think should have been included. And I've even seen it happen in teams. I've been in a lot of meetings where, accessibility experts, we all sit around and we talk about the guidelines and what they mean and, what actually passes and what, particular references and words mean and what is a pass and what is a fail. And, then we come to some sort of middle ground and depending on how strictly they're interpreted, what sufficient means and how they assess ambiguous cases and what evidence they accept, standards can be interpreted and implemented differently. So even though we're all working from the same rule book, we're potentially all using it slightly different. And this means that WCAG compliant is not a single definable state. It's always a judgment call. And under pressure, time pressure, budget pressure, delivery pressure, interpretations tend to drift towards the minimum. And again, I can't tell you how many times I've been there, and I'm sure this is familiar for everybody else. We raise an audit, we get to an end, we have a chat to the client, and they're like, well, we won't have time to fix all of these things. Do we have to fix this? What do we really need to fix? What do we need to fix first? Who do we need to fix for? Do we need to fix for the screen reader users? It starts to become a negotiation over what needs to be fixed. So you have an audit, you write a report, you say, here are your problems, and then we go into negotiation over what's really a problem, what should be fixed. And then we get to the end and we go, okay, that's compliant. And the drift isn't malicious, it's structural. And understanding it is essential to understanding why compliance alone is never enough. The compliance mindset asks one question: can this be used? It's the question that audits are designed to answer. It looks at whether controls are present, whether alt text exists, whether color contrast meets ratio thresholds. And, AA or AAA, the ratio threshold under AA is lower than AAA, but which is actually better? And do we even consider AAA? And these things matter. but they describe the possibility of access, not the experience of access. When the compliance mindset dominates, teams celebrate a pass audit, the way they celebrate shipping a product. It's done. We've done our compliance check. We've done our audit. We've completed everything. The work's done. The boxes are checked. We move on. But the user hasn't moved on. They're still there trying to complete a task. The lived experience question is a different one entirely. What is it like to use this? This is what users experience. Not just whether they can technically reach a button, but whether the page makes sense, whether they feel confused or respected or exhausted, whether they had to fight the interface to complete a basic task. User experience research, usability testing with people with disabilities, and genuine inclusion in design processes are how we answer this question. You can't answer it with an automated tool. You can't fully answer it with a manual audit alone. You answer it by watching real people use real products and taking what you see seriously. The space between possible to use and practical to use is where most of the accessibility problems live that never get fixed. And let's face it, the accessibility failures that do get fixed are generally only critical and high, where it can be the medium and the low issues that cause the biggest issues for real users. The gap is invisible. The gap is invisible in audits, but very visible to users. It shows up as a screen reader user who can technically access a data table, but has to navigate 200 cells to find the one piece of information that they need. A person with a motor impairment who can technically use a keyboard navigation, but has to tab through 60 interactive elements to reach the main content. A cognitive accessibility issue where a form is technically valid, but uses jargon that makes it incomprehensible. These are real, meaningful barriers. They just don't show up in a conformance report. Real accessibility experience has multiple dimensions, and we need to think about all of them. Over the next few slides, I'm going to walk through 6 dimensions that I see evidenced in usability testing that say whether a digital product is genuinely accessible, not just technically compliant. These aren't invented from scratch. They're grounded in accessibility research and years of usability testing with people with a wide range of disabilities. But they go beyond what standard audits capture. Think of them as a lens for seeing what compliance leaves invisible. Access is a baseline. Can someone technically reach and operate the product? This is where standards live. Keyboard operability, screen reader compatibility, sufficient color contrast, text alternative for images. These are essential. Without access, nothing is possible. But access is the floor, not the ceiling. And it's necessary, but never sufficient on its own. When we talk about access and accessibility work, we're asking, is the door open? And that's important. But we need to ask, can everyone move through it comfortably? Equity asks a different question. Does the system distribute effort evenly across users with different ability, devices, and contexts? A product can be technically accessible, but deeply inequitable. A sighted user can complete a task in 30 seconds, and a screen reader user needs 8 minutes, and that's not equitable, even if it technically passes. Equity asks us to look at the full picture of who bears the costs of design decisions. In most cases, the answer is people with disabilities pay more. More clicks, more confusion, more workarounds, more time. And time is precious for someone with a disability. Everyday tasks often take a lot longer, and now everything we ask them to do takes longer as well. More clicks, more touch points, more interactions. When the technology is there to reduce these things, but we often don't implement it because it takes too much of our time, it takes too much of our budget, it takes too much of work on our behalf to make things easier when it's possible. One person that I work with was telling me once about a big fan of AFL for the people in America, Australian rules football, or anyone dialing in from overseas who isn't aware. And he's a wheelchair user. Now, before he was a wheelchair user, he had an accident and is now a wheelchair user. Before he used to go to the footy, he used to jump online, book his ticket, off he'd go in his seat, enjoy his game. Now the process is he has to call up, ask for an accessible ticket, And then on the day, he doesn't even know where his seating spot is until he arrives. And it could be around the whole entire other side of the oval. And the ovals are quite big, maybe not as large as some of the ovals in America, but it's still a long way to travel and not knowing where you're going. He needs to ring up, he needs to speak to someone. I know that concert goers, they have to get into a different line, they have to call up, they have to let people know that they're coming, that they need accessible space. All of this is put onto the person with a disability who is having to take longer to do every other everyday task. We all have that same 24 hours in the day, but other people are taking longer to do things, and we're making them use more effort to do everyday tasks because we're focusing on compliance and whether they can use it as opposed to whether they can use it efficiently. So designing for equity means reducing the gap, not just removing the barriers, but actively sharing the experience more fairly. Quality is about design performance in real use. Does the product do what it promises, clearly, reliably, and for everyone? Quality failures can be the hardest to surface in audits, not because audits can't find them, but because they often hide in the gap between a criterion technically passing and the design genuinely working well. An error message can be present and programmatically associated and still be poorly worded and being useless. Often we see when there's a bit of a push and pull between accessibility and security. So we often get your email or password are incorrect. And that's great, but I don't know which one. And I've got 4 more tries to try and work out which one and no idea what to do to fix it. Or when a password field doesn't have a show hide option, so you can't actually see if you've mistyped something. As a person with ADHD, it's really, really helpful for me to open that little eye symbol and see what I've typed and go, oh, my big fat fingers have hit the wrong, I've hit an S instead of an A or something like that. I can fix it and I'm straight in. It would have passed an audit. Nothing about that fails an audit, but that could have actually locked me out of my account if I didn't know where the problem was and I kept trying. A heading structure can be technically valid and still fail to communicate a page's information hierarchy. These pass the checkbox, they fail the person. Low quality accessibility creates a situation where users with disabilities are technically served but practically failed. The experience works, but barely, and barely isn't good enough. Usability asks whether someone can complete meaningful tasks without confusion, without unnecessary friction, without harm or exhaustion. This is where usability testing becomes critical. You can't assess this from code alone. You have to watch someone to try to actually do something with the product. The without harm or exhaustion clause is important. Some interfaces are technically useful and usable but cause genuine distress, confusing flows that create anxiety, sensory overload from animations or contrast or sound, cognitive load from ambiguous language. These are accessibility failures even when no standard is technically violated. Usability is the dimension that makes accessibility feel human. The interface is where humans actually meet systems and where inclusion or exclusion happens in practice. Everything abstract about accessibility becomes concrete at the interface. The words on the button, the error message, the loading state, the focus indicator, the order elements appear when read out loud. Good interface design for accessibility is not just about technical correctness. It's about the quality of the decisions made at every point of contact. It's the difference between an interface that tolerates users with disabilities and one that is genuinely designed for them. Every interface decision is an inclusion decision. It helps if you treat it that way. And this is why we should be including real users at every step. And by real users, not just technically proficient people with disability who understand what we're doing, but real people who will ultimately become your end user with their own varied levels of experience with technology and with their disability or disabilities. Standardization gives us something essential: structure, defensibility, and repeatability. Without standards, accessibility assessments become entirely subjective. Standards provide a shared vocabulary, a measurable baseline, and a mechanism for accountability. They make it possible to say, this product doesn't meet the minimum in a way that holds up. The risk is when standardization becomes the end point rather than the starting point. When we meet the standard, is treated as we're done. Standards are not opinion, though can be open to interpretation. They are a measurable baseline, but a baseline is a beginning, not a destination. WCAG's AAA level is described as in compliance framework as aspirational, meaning you don't have to meet it to claim conformance. WCAG 2.2 AA is considered the gold standard when it comes to accessibility. That's where everyone is trying to reach. But here's what that obscures. Some AAA criteria aren't luxuries, they're dignity thresholds. Sign language for pre-recorded audio, extended audio descriptions, touch target sizes, reading level support. These aren't edge cases for edge users. They're essential for real human participation for a significant portion of people with disability. Yet we generally don't test for them. When we frame AAA as aspirational, we implicitly accept that some people will be excluded, and we've just decided that that's okay. This is a values statement, not a technical one. Once a product passes something very predictable happens. Attention moves on. The work feels complete. Risk feels resolved. Teams move to the next sprint, the next feature, the next product. But usability gaps remain. And they remain invisible because the mechanism we use to detect accessibility problems, the audit, has already been declared a success. This is the invisible ceiling. The audit finds what audits can find. Everything above the ceiling is simply not seen. And not because it doesn't exist, but because our tools aren't designed to look for it. Breaking through the invisible ceiling requires different tools, user research, ongoing feedback channels, and a commitment to treating accessibility as a continuous practice rather than a point-in-time test. So where does friction actually live? It lives in the gap between what's technically possible and what's practically reasonable. It lives in interactions that work, but work poorly, in flows that are navigable, but exhausting, in content that is technically present, but incomprehensible. It's far too early for me to be speaking. Friction is the accumulated cost of design decisions made without people with disability in mind. It's rarely catastrophic enough to trigger an audit finding, but it is constant, real, and cumulative. And it falls disproportionately on people who can least afford it. Users who are already working harder to engage with digital systems that weren't built with them in mind. So here's a reframe that I find transformative in practice. Accessibility is not just about access. It's about the amount of effort required to access. Two users can both access a product and have radically different experiences based on how much effort that access required. One clicks a button, the other navigates 30 keyboard interactions, interprets an ambiguous error message, and finally reaches the same outcome. If you're filling out a form and we see it all the time where you're putting in your email address and it keeps popping up to tell you that your email address is incorrect. You haven't finished typing the email address, but you keep getting the error message and it might flash on screen and that can be annoying. It's like, yeah, okay, let me get to the end. I haven't finished yet. But if you're a screen reader user and that error message is constantly popping up and interrupting what you're trying to do, when you're still sitting there knowing I haven't finished, give me a minute to let me complete my email address and then we can all move on, it's constantly interrupting you. That experience goes from mildly annoying to disruptive. Both people in these instances access the product, but one worked far harder to do it. That differential access and that differential effort is an accessibility failure, even if no standard is violated. When we start measuring effort, we start seeing barriers that compliance frameworks don't consider. Human safety in digital accessibility means ensuring that interactions don't cause harm, stress, confusion, or risk. This is a dimension that often gets overlooked because it doesn't fit neatly into technical criteria. But real people experience real harm from poorly designed digital interfaces. Flashing content can trigger seizures. Confusing medical forms can lead to errors in critical health information. Inaccessible authentication flows can lock people out of essential services. Unpredictable interactions can cause genuine distress for users with cognitive or psychiatric disabilities. Safety is not an edge case. It's a core dimension of accessible design. We need to design like people's well-being depends on it, because sometimes it does. Cognitive equity means ensuring information is understandable, predictable, and low cognitive load. Cognitive accessibility is consistently under-resourced in accessibility programs. It doesn't show up clearly in automated tools. It's harder to test. It requires plain language expertise, UX skills, and genuine engagement with cognitive diversity. But cognitive inaccessibility is one of the most common forms of digital exclusion. Jargon, ambiguous labels, inconsistent navigation, dense walls of text, unpredictable interactions. These exclude people with cognitive disabilities, acquired brain injuries, learning differences, people whose language isn't the first language that the content is written in, and anyone operating under stress or fatigue. Plain language is not about reducing complexity or simplification for its own sake. It's designing for the full range of human cognition. Plain language respects intelligence by reducing unnecessary cognitive effort, not by reducing ideas. I'm working on a project at the moment. We're doing a card sorting exercise for a government department, and there's a lot of language, there's a lot of terms and words that they use, and being the English language, we can have one word with several meanings. And in a government context, these particular words have a very simple to them meaning. We've put those words in front of people with cognitive disabilities and cognitive differences, and what those words mean aren't necessarily the way they're intended from the government point of view. And it's really eye-opening to see people sort things into categories that aren't in the context of what government sees them on an everyday basis, that just seem to come so naturally. So it's really eye-opening for the client to sit there and go, oh, when we use that word, people think of this. When we use it, we think of this. So including people from the very start of your project, from the card sorting, tree testing, as you're building, is really, really important, because it tends to unearth these things so that you don't bake them into your product at the end and use assumptions that just seem so natural to you. Sensory access means ensuring content works across vision, hearing, and sensory processing differences. We often frame sensory accessibility around screen readers for blindness and captions for deafness. And those are critical, but sensory access is much broader. It includes users with low vision who zoom to 400% plus and still need an interface to remain logical and usable. Users with coloured vision deficiency who rely on more than colour alone to understand meaning. Users with sensory processing differences who may be overwhelmed by animations, autoplaying videos, flashing elements, or visually noisy interfaces. Many of these issues already exist within WCAG and can appear as audit findings. The question is whether they are receiving the depth of consideration they deserve in a typical compliance-focused audit process. Too often they're treated as isolated technical checkpoints rather than a part of a broader human sensory experience. I worked with a client years ago in an app, and the app had these little balls. And when they showed me the app, it was in development, and I got to put it on my phone. And the little balls had information in them, and as you moved your phone, they moved, and the ball sort of just rotated around on the screen. And it was lovely. And as a person with ADHD, I missed 40% of that meeting because I was just moving my phone, watching the balls move around. There was no reason for them to move. And when we did user testing, everybody that we tested with, and we tested with screen reader users, we tested with people with low vision, we tested with people with cognitive disabilities, and we tested with people with motor skill disabilities. All of them hated these spinning balls. We put that in our report. The client loved their spinning balls, and they went ahead with the spinning balls. And the number of billboards I had to drive past with this picture of this particular product with their balls that we told them not to put in was a very frustrating experience for me. Sensory access asks deeper questions. Can someone meaningfully engage with this content regardless of how they perceive the world? This is a far richer measure of accessibility than simply asking whether alt text exists or captions are present. Motor autonomy means ensuring interaction works with a keyboard, touch, voice, and assistive technologies. Motor disabilities are diverse. Some users have limited fine motor control, others use switches, eye tracking, mouth sticks, or sip and puff devices. Some use voice control, like Dragon Naturally Speaking. Some use keyboard navigation because a mouse use is painful or impossible. And some people switch because, on certain days they're able to use a mouse, other days their pain threshold, it's not going to work, so they're going to be using Dragon. So they switch between. Designing for motor autonomy means generous touch target sizes, no time limits, no drag and drop is the only option, full keyboard operability, logical focus order, and meaningful focus indicators. It also means testing with assistive technologies, not just running an automated check. The only way to know if your product works with a screen reader or voice control software is to use those tools and see. But the only way to know if it will work for people who rely on those types of technologies is to include them in your testing or research. As auditors, as accessibility experts, we can all run a screen reader over something, but when we've got vision, we're still relying on our vision. We still have context on where we are on the page. Simonette in our team recently did an experiment using TalkBack to order Uber Eats for her lunch. And while it was technically accessible, and she said she got her lunch and it was great, she might not have received her food if she wasn't also sighted. She still had to rely on her vision. And then you consider the full customer journey. When you get your Uber Eats and the app is accessible and that's great. But when you talk to people who are using those kinds of services, it's also, where's the food left? If your Uber Eats driver drops it on your front porch somewhere, you don't know where you have to kind of follow your nose to find out where your food is on the porch, which is not necessarily good for anyone. I've seen people have using services like Be My Eyes to go and find their Uber Eats or their postage parcel on the porch because they get a notification that it's here but not where it is. So you also have to consider the entire customer journey and all of their touch points, not just your siloed piece of digital. Technical integrity means ensuring systems work reliably across devices, browsers, and assistive technologies. An accessible design that breaks in certain browsers, fails with certain screen reader versions, or behaves unpredictably on mobile is not meaningfully accessible. Technical integrity is the foundation on which all other dimensions rest. This requires real cross-device, cross-AT testing, not just desktop Chrome with NVDA. It means testing on iOS with VoiceOver, Android with TalkBack, Windows with JAWS and NVDA, and across the browsers your users actually use. Technical integrity is often where good accessibility intentions meet the messiness of real-world implementation. It's unglamorous work, but it's also essential. We often see accessibility statements or advice letting customers know that a website won't work with a particular device browser combination. And while that will tell me it's not a me issue why I can't do something on a website, it doesn't tell me how to complete the task that I came here in the first place. You need to consider that not everyone is technically proficient. They wouldn't know how to download a different browser that meets your tech stack. And if they did, there's a whole new interface that they have to learn just to use your website with their piece of assistive technology. This is not intended as a criticism of organisations that include these statements. Providing some guidance is far better than leaving users without context, but these statements should not become the limit of your accessibility effort. We've let people know that they can't use it with the tools that they're using. All done. Thanks for coming. It doesn't work like that. People still need to access your site. And saying that, oh, it doesn't work with NVDA, but it works with JAWS, that's great, but I don't have JAWS. It works with this browser, but not that browser. That's great, but I don't have that browser and I can't access that browser. So I can't access your service. So you're still locking people out. So while we're trying to do the right thing and we're trying to do the best by everyone, sometimes we get to an end point and we go, well, that's all that we can do about that, and we move on. But the customer's still left in the dark. So this shift that I'm asking you to take back to your teams is not, does it meet the requirement? Are we compliant? Can we get a certificate? But it's, what is the lived experience of this design? These questions look similar. They're fundamentally different. The first is closed. It's a yes or no answer. Are we compliant? Yes. Did we meet the requirement? Yes. Can I get a certificate? No. The second is open. It requires observation, curiosity, and ongoing engagement with people that you're designing for. The first question ends with an audit report or a certificate. The second ends with a practice, a commitment to continuous improvement to user involvement, to treating accessibility as a design quality standard rather than a compliance checkbox. That shift changes everything. How teams prioritize, what they measure, who they involve, and what success looks like. So what gets missed when we stop at compliance? Almost everything that makes an experience genuinely good for people with disabilities. The effort differential, the dignity threshold, the cognitive load, the sensory experience, the safety risk, the accumulation friction, the small decisions in copy, in interaction design, in information architecture that determine whether someone feels included or merely tolerated. None of that shows up in a conformance report. And that's not a criticism of standards. Standards matter where CAG matters. But they were never designed to carry the full weight of inclusion. Real accessibility requires real human engagement with the people who use our products and with the question of what kind of experience we want to create for them. And that's what Global Accessibility Awareness Day is about, for reminding us that behind every standard is a person, and our job is to design for that person. Thank you all for listening. I hope that I got you thinking on some certain things, and we'll open up the floor to questions.
Thank you, Charlie. That was awesome. Thank you. Some really great takeaways here. I've got some here, but actually it was my call to action at the beginning. So if anyone's got some of their key takeaways top of mind, if you want to add them into the chat, please do, and we can share those. We do have some questions in the Q&A function, so I will share those now for you. So Carly's asked, what would an ideal user group look like for assessing if a product, service, feature, document, etc., is not only accessible technically, but usable, inclusive, and provides an equitable, low effort, and positive experience?
We have generally our sort of, I think it's top five user groups, and this comes from general user testing. You'll get 8 people or thereabouts, sometimes 5, sometimes 12, but around about 8 people of the same demographic. So you'll look at your service and go, okay, well, our client or our perfect customer is somebody who is aged between 26 and 52. They have a dual income. They like to ride their bike on the weekend, and they have about this much money in their super, or whatever the demographics are that you're measuring. And you get, a group of those 8 people, and you put the product in front of them, and then you can sit there and go, oh, well, 6 out of 8 like this, 3 of the 8 didn't like this, and you can sort of extrapolate from that. Unfortunately, when it comes to usability testing, we are often bound by budget. So it means that we tend to we'll get one person with no visions, a screen reader user, one person with low vision, one person with a cognitive disability, and cognitive disability is such a broad standard. So it could be somebody who is neurodivergent, it could be somebody who has an acquired brain injury, it could be somebody who has dyslexia, those kinds of differences. One person with a motor skill impairment, so that's whether they are a non-mouse user, whether they are someone with tremors, whether they are somebody who uses an alternate input device, and somebody with hearing loss, or somebody who's deaf. So we sort of have a top 5. It's not the ideal, but it's generally what is budgeted for. So it's generally what we can get through. And often we can't even include people who are deaf because there is an extra cost of using an interpreter. But if you can get 5 people, so one person from each of those categories, to put this product in front of and get feedback from them, it's a really good start. If you can get 5 people who are screen reader users, 5 people who have low vision, 5 people who are deaf, 5 people who have a motor skill impairment, 5 people who have a cognitive disability, that's even better. So start somewhere, do what you can, but generally we find that we get one of five, or we might get two screen reader users because screen readers seem to be the thing that people are most familiar with making things accessible for. So we'll often get two screen readers. So
Thanks, Charlie. That's awesome. We're getting more and more questions and lots of key takeaways in the chat as well. So there's lots and lots of key takeaways. So thank you for that. Michael made a comment. I learn best from examples. Can we have a meeting? 100 web examples and what was done to fix them? I think that's a great idea. So thanks, Michael. Carly, I often see user testing and research with customers done in prototypes in systems like Figma. However, using a live app, website, or service in real-world scenarios can be a very different experience, and often features are tested in isolation. How do we test early enough to build things in the right way, but make the testing more relevant to real use?
Look, including people and not including the same people. So having a diverse community of users that you have access to is really important. Like I said, I'm doing a project now where we're doing card sorting. And we didn't have a card sorting tool that was accessible, so we kind of built one to use for this particular project that was really fun. But we're doing card testing with people. The client's really interested in cognitive load. And even in that session, we had a user with low vision who also has ADHD and some chronic illnesses. And even just the process of card sorting and the pressure of sorting the cards, this person felt overwhelmed. And, we had to really manage the session for this person's, again, safety and dignity. So you can start at card sorting, tree testing. You can bring them in design. You can start with bringing people in interviews. You can manage through testing with prototypes and Figma. It's not like there's nothing that you can really test with people who are blind, although I have done testing before where I've had a prototype and done what's called a Wizard of Oz method, where you kind of talk the person who's a screen reader user through what's on the screen and they'll give you feedback. Really important to have someone who is technically proficient, screen reader proficient, who really knows what they're talking about at those points. And I guess when you're including people, including different people at different stages can also be really important. So at the beginning stages, if you are doing prototypes, finding people who are technically proficient, people who have accessibility knowledge. I've got a lot of people in my network who are uh, proficient in coding, who have a that they really are involved in accessibility. They understand accessibility from a WCAG standpoint. So you can bring those people in the beginning because they can tell you how things should respond and if they're responding in the right way. And then at the end, save it for people who are maybe less technically proficient, who are then looking at your end product. But there are ways of including people all the way along, and asking people and getting their feedback in the beginning. And I've been doing this, for years. I still learn something new every time I work with someone, and it can be the same person. I can sit and talk to people and, something that has never come up in user testing, but as we're having a conversation, I make a realization on how they're doing things. I did user testing with a bank and wheelchair users at an ATM. So this was a physical product as opposed to strictly digital. And we realized that from a person sitting in a wheelchair, the colors display completely differently. So I guess finding ways that you can bring people in, finding the right people, there are always ways around it. You just have to be a little bit creative sometimes.
Awesome, thank you. That's and a really great example as well. This the change in color on the ATM. Yeah, it's a great example. Thanks, Charlie. Okay. Next question from Chidi. Do you have any advice for what we can do when the needs of two user groups conflict? It does go on to say a lot of social media guidelines focus on the needs of screen reader users, but a lot of those guidelines make content difficult for neurospicy people.
It's a hard one. It's a really hard one. And the thing is, I guess talking to people, the more research that you do, the more people that you speak to, the easier it is to find a way around something or to find something that works for everyone. if you have some high level knowledge about what one particular cohort prefers and uses, and then knowledge around what another particular cohort prefers and uses, and you've only got a high level of understanding, you can only work from that point. So talk to more people, get some more understanding, and then you'll find different ways of working. Like the ATM situation where we found out that the colors were different. So now the bank is looking at different ways to have the screen tilted. But without doing that testing, they didn't know. So it really is about getting out and talking to people, because you can generally find ways around that you haven't thought of. Like any problem that you have, the more people that you talk to, you tend to come up with more ideas and things that you hadn't thought of, and people bring more to the table, and then you can make your way around things. So that's probably the way I'd go about it, is just keep talking to people. None of this is going to be a quick fix. None of this is going to be, oh, this is my problem. We need to fix by tomorrow. It's always going to be a journey. None of this will have an end point. But if we keep making things incrementally better, it will start getting better for everyone. Just the reframing of whether it's compliant over whether it's usable is starting to put a new twist on WCAG and how we look at accessibility. And even those changes will have benefits for everybody in the community.
Awesome. Thank you, Charlie. Next question. Are you running any upcoming sessions? So to be confirmed. So yes. But yes, Charlie is running something else for GAAD. But yeah, we'll definitely share. You can sign up for our newsletter, and we have all of our webinars and training sessions on our website. So as we upload those for Charlie and for usability, we can send that information out to everyone as well. And then the next question here, any advice for how we can navigate or negotiate pushback regarding people thinking AA WCAG equals done? When I try to suggest meeting a AAA standard for one specific thing, I get told AA is fine.
Yeah, and that's basically the entire crux of this talk, is that we rely on WCAG 2.2 AA as the gold standard. And also sometimes we feel grateful just to get that far. One question that comes up in pretty much every talk that I do and every talk that I attend is, how do we get C-suite buy-in? And so we've gotten C-suite buy-in to the point of them agreeing to WCAG 2.2 AA. So how far do we push the envelope? And the thing is, we need to keep pushing. Share this recording. We also do lunch and learn, so we can come in with some members of our community and have a chat, or do a virtual chat. Talking to real people and seeing real people use your product is probably the best way to show that WCAG 2.2 AA is great and it gets you to a certain point, but it doesn't necessarily make things usable. So include usability testing, talk to the community, get people in from the community to tell you about their experience, and make sure that those things go up to the C-suite and to higher management, because that's how they understand, is when they start seeing the struggles.
Thanks, Charlie. I am conscious of time. We've only got a couple of minutes to go. There are a few more questions in the chat, so we will review those. We will be posting something after in relation to, we will share the recording, but we can also answer any additional questions and send that around with the recording. So, so if we didn't get to your question, we will. Charlie, do you mind if we go to the next slide? Is that okay? I personally would love to thank Charlie. There's some really nice comments in the chat. Charlie, please have a look. We'd just love to thank you for your presentation today. I hope it's gotten everyone thinking about digital accessibility and what you might take back to your teams for tomorrow to celebrate. And I'd like to thank everyone for dialing in today. It was really great participation, some fantastic questions, and yeah, we've loved having you online. And we hope to see you again. So yeah, at any future sessions that we're running, we'd love to see you online. So thank you to everyone who's dialed in today. Yeah, reach out if you have any questions. We've got some contact details on the screen. You can reach out through our website. So please feel free. If you've got questions, just want to chat, we'd be more than happy to do that. So yeah, please reach out. And thank you, Charlie.
You're welcome. Have a great GAAD, everyone. And yeah, hopefully you can start some more conversations from this talk.
Yeah, happy GAAD. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.